But before we go any further, here's our top story, and it's an ET Now exclusive. This is what we've heard. The Modi government is very keen on making the startup ecosystem in India more Aatmanirbhar than it currently is. They're keen on rolling out new schemes for Indian startups and make this entire ecosystem Aatmanirbhar. Sources are telling us that the Department of Promotion for Industry and Internal Trade, which is DPIIT, is working on this proposal to boost the startup ecosystem with domestic capital and credit. In fact, fiscal incentives are also being discussed within there. Let's find out what the deal is. Karishma Asoodani, my colleague, is breaking the story for us here on ET Now. Karishma, what are you hearing about the government and its new push for making the startup ecosystem that much more Aatmanirbhar, more robust in the country?
Well, finally something to look forward to in 2020. My sources tell me that Modi government is very keen on rolling out a scheme for startups and to give certain kind of relaxations. In fact, sources hint that DPIIT along with the Revenue Department of Finance Ministry is working on finalizing this proposal, which is in its last stage, currently submitted with the Expenditure Department of Finance Ministry. Well, most important, what's in the proposal? We are picking up that DPIIT in its draft cabinet proposal has given consideration to credit guarantee scheme and seed funding for startups. Because of the major distress caused by COVID-19 and the concept of Aatmanirbhar Bharat and self-reliant India, the government is keen on giving extra additional funds in this year for startups to survive. We know the kind of distress startups have gone through. In fact, recent reports suggest that 15% of them have collapsed due to no funds because of the lockdown and the pandemic. Well, this will be the right time because startups are the backbone of the economy of India. The Modi government has been keen on pushing the Make in India concept and on the Indian startup system that it has been focusing on. This is the right time, and a proposal like this will definitely give boost to the industry and will of course encourage more and more number of startups to come up.
We'll have to see exactly how this works out. As soon as we have more information, we'll be sharing that with you. But for the moment, let's get in a perspective from Serial Entrepreneur K Ganesh, who's joining us on this edition of Startup Central. Very good evening. And this is news that the startup ecosystem can look forward to. But before we get into what the government is actually mulling, I want to get a sense of what the current seed funding situation is for the startup ecosystem in India, especially in this COVID world. How is it looking as of now?
Yeah. So what has happened in the COVID world or during the pandemic situation is a real pause on the funding situation. Understandably so, because the investors are taking a pause. Nobody wants to catch a falling knife. They are waiting to see what is the new normal, how long does it take to get to the new normal, and how much time will it take before things return to some form of normalcy. Also, most of the sectors are getting affected with headwinds, some for shorter duration, some for longer duration. So I would say, other than say healthcare and edtech and remote working like video conferencing, which have seen tailwinds hugely, including e-commerce. We have seen companies like Amazon, Flipkart, and our own Big Basket benefiting from the tailwinds, and so is Portia Medical with healthcare. But most of the other companies, other sectors are being affected. Hopefully some of them, once the lockdown eases out, will come back to most of the normal. But what's happening with investors is they are not able to take a call on valuation because of so much of uncertainties. So they are just taking a pause. The good news is post-December, from January onwards, we expect a lot more clarity. A lot of funds have been raised in the last 18 to 24 months. They need to deploy. There's a lot of dry gunpowder sitting, waiting to be deployed. So all that is good news. But 2020 has been a washout. January onwards, we should see more things. What would really help is government initiatives, government releasing more funds. Already government had set up platforms like Startup India, Make in India, and all of those. Fortunately, pre-COVID, enough initiatives have been taken. Now it is to ensure that they remove the impediments, reduce the friction, and are actually able to deploy. The last thing I would say is government as a buyer, as a consumer is huge. So what really would help the startup, apart from funding, is if government can relax the rules for tendering, for procurement from startups. They should not insist on earnest money deposit. They should not insist on minimum criteria of 3 years of profitability or bank guarantees and all of those restrictions, so that they can actually buy products and services in huge from startups. I think that is something that they can do. But hopefully we are seeing end of 2020, January onwards.
What you seem to be suggesting, Ganesh, what you seem to be suggesting over here, that the role of the government needs to be that much of a player within the entire ecosystem as part of the entire business that startups would generate, to be a buyer in that sense. But what is the need of the hour as far as the government's role is concerned? And what my colleague Karishma is telling us is that the government wants to be that much more of a facilitator in making these funds available to the startup ecosystem. Seed funding is where it's at. So when you look at the government's role that is required right now, where is the concentration, you think, in what you are suggesting by way of the government trying to procure more from Indian startups? Or do you think there need to be that much more in the space of facilitating more funds coming into the Indian startup universe when it comes to seed funding?
Yeah, so very clearly, I think this is a once in a century pandemic which is unprecedented. Government needs to act on all fronts. I won't choose one over the other. Government as a buyer and as consumer of startup, as a user of startup is huge. That's only one. The second is seed funding. See, a lot of sectors don't receive the funds. Whatever we see in media and hear about it is the sexy, glamorous tech sector, hockey stick curve, valuations and all that. But that's, even though it gets talked about, that's hardly 1% of the startup. More than 90% of the startup are on the non-glamorous areas which don't attract the venture capital, typical tech venture capital investor attention. Social impact capital, capital for rural areas, for impact sectors, capital for startups that employ a lot number of people, that creates employment, but is not really valuation driven and attraction of VCs. Those are the areas where seed funds should flow. So allocating funds to highly employment intensive startup is something the government can do. For funds for agriculture sector, agri-tech and areas which are often neglected by the traditional tech venture capitalists, what government can do. That is the second one. Third one is really what we talked about, credit guarantee scheme, actually ensuring that the banks lend. There is no liquidity. Money is stuck at every stage of the system. So having banks lend to startup, but without collateral, without securities, okay, on longer term basis, that would help a lot. So I think government, both for credit for startups, yes, which currently is zero, non-existent, seed funds for those which normally underserved sectors which don't get the normal private venture capital, and three, government as a buyer, user of a system. All of that is needed. I would not choose one over the other. But I think we need that from the government.
Yes, absolutely. But Ganesh, you did mention that the tailwinds are actually favoring the behemoths in this space, whether it's the Flipkarts or the Googles at this point in time, and that has left many of the Indian startups, the smaller startups, the ones that are catering perhaps to Bharat, as it were. They've been left high and dry in this funding race as of now. So when you look at the online insurance business, the education business, teleconsultations, e-payments, online stock brokerage or groceries, all of these are returning to pre-COVID levels, but the other businesses are suffering as of now. So to be able to help them, the government is mulling what they can do and what they can't do. But when it comes to the role that the government needs to play, because like you said, there is a lot of social incentive. You're talking about employment generation over here. So that role needs to be that much more accentuated, right? So tell us about the tools that you think the government has, because also what is getting mulled over is a fund of funds. Now, how much has that helped in the past and how much can it help in the future?
No, fund of funds, again, fund of funds is something that definitely has helped in the past. Government, through the fund of funds, has contributed up to a certain limit. I think it's 20 or 25% for funds, provided they are able to raise the balance money from other limited partners. All of that See, every bit helps. It is never one or the other. But unfortunately, when the fund of funds, when the government is putting it in funds, those funds are private funds. They are going after those sectors which are hot sectors that you just mentioned. But that is only one part of it. Those are already getting the attention needed. For a Flipkart or for Amazon or for Big Basket to raise money, it's not difficult. You don't need government. You don't need special intervention. They already are rocking and they are raising money. But those are few and far between. You can count them on your fingertips. And this money goes into few large leaders who are winners in their category. But for every one winner, there are 100 other companies. India is such a large country. One Flipkart and Big Basket cannot serve it, or one Potia Medical cannot serve the healthcare needs of the thing. So rest of it don't get the attention. That is where government needs to choose. What I'm saying is, if you take the top leaders, they are well taken care of. You and I or government doesn't need to bother. They are rocking and they are doing on their own. It is where they are not being served is where government need to fit in. And government needs to bring in the social angle, where can I do it in those sectors which normally will not attract the hockey stick valuation driven private capital investment? Can I put money behind companies which may not be really AI, machine learning and not Bitcoin, but which will generate thousands of jobs? Okay, take healthcare, geriatric care, elder care, for example. Okay, right? Taking care of people in remote places in India, people who are old, is non-glamorous. It's a tough job. It typically will not interest a tech venture capital, but it's a healthcare problem of the country. The single biggest problem in the pandemic post-COVID is healthcare of people. Can government come up with funds which it will deploy so that we are able to generate millions of jobs for healthcare workers?
No, this point that you make is well taken, K Ganesh. Thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on this. The government clearly now mulling on how the Indian startup ecosystem with seed funding can get a new impetus, because the glamour industries, like K Ganesh is pointing out, is drawing in all the funds and it's leaving the others high and dry. Which is what the government would like to correct. How far they will go is something we are watching out for, but we have preliminary details. A cabinet note is out, and how soon this is going to be in play is something we are watching indeed. We'll take a very small breather on this edition of Startup Central. On the flip side, we'll talk about data protection as far as the likes of WhatsApp Pay and Amazon Pay, etc. are concerned. The Supreme Court has a thing or two to say about it. We'll find out exactly what in just a moment. Do stay with us.